Hello family, and welcome back to our wild Ohio. Today, we're taking a look at Native Americans from Ohio. Before I began doing some intense research into the subject, I had this general impression that before the early settlers came into Ohio, the land was teeming with Native Americans that had lived here peacefully for thousands of years. Before the Europeans came, the prehistoric mound builders were here for centuries, perhaps dating back to about the same time as when the Great Pyramids in Egypt were built. Over the centuries, the mound builders' civilization grew and expanded throughout much of Ohio. Large communities with thousands of inhabitants sprang up in various areas across the state. Then, within a short period of time, the mound building culture disappeared from Ohio. By the time Christopher Columbus was setting foot in the Caribbean, the mound builders and their practice of building earthworks disappeared completely from Ohio. It would take almost a century before Native Americans would enter Ohio and establish hunting camps. We are not sure what happened to the mound builders, but their expansive civilization came to an abrupt end. The surviving peoples making up those civilizations seemed to have dispersed throughout the country. Once they left their villages and earthworks were taken over by vegetation and forests. The fields once farmed went unplanted. By 1650, the French explorers were wading ashore around Lake Erie and exploring the land south. They found a few isolated tribes in the north as well as the strange mounds. Those indigenous people they met could not explain the purpose of the mounds, nor who built them. The Iroquois and Algonquian, the first Europeans began arriving in Ohio, they found two somewhat distinct cultures, the Iroquois and Algonquians. The Algonquians primarily inhabited what is today Canada from the Rockies east to the Atlantic Ocean and down along the east coast. The Iroquois lived on the land south and east of Lake Ontario. Almost all of the native groups living in Ohio were related to these two major cultures that were constantly at war with each other. About this time, the groups from the Iroquois Confederacy located in New York began an organized effort to control the land south and to the west, eventually driving out any native groups that would not accept the Iroquois way. So the Iroquois became a large mixed group of various clans that eventually expanded to the west on the land between the Ohio River and Lake Erie. When the first Europeans landed on the east coast of North America, they most likely met a group of Iroquois. Lake Erie was named for a group of Iroquois called Erie. The Algonquians might really be called Native Canadians. Although their influence stretched as far west as the Rocky Mountains and as far south as Virginia, they primarily inhabited the area around modern-day Quebec. Like the Iroquois, the Algonquians were an amalgamation of various clans speaking slightly different languages, but a language that each could understand well enough to communicate effectively when they met. When the Europeans arrived in North America, they began trading with both Iroquois and Algonquian for foreign exchange for goods including weapons, ammunition, and other European goods. This led to competition between the two major groups that often erupted in drawn-out armed conflict. As demand for animal pelts increased, both the Iroquois and Algonquians began to expand their spheres of activity to acquire more furs. This only intensified the hatred between the two. Warfare would even erupt within the groups if clans within the group didn't hold the line. A good case in point was the bloody war that erupted between the main Iroquois Confederation and the Erie Nation. The Erie were part of the Iroquois, but because they took in some Huron who were in a bitter fight with the Iroquois Confederacy. Because of the Erie's actions, the Iroquois became openly hostile towards the Erie and in time, completely destroyed their clan. In time, the Iroquois found themselves overextended and unable to defend all the lands they had acquired, and so they retreated back into what is now New York. This left the Ohio Territory unprotected and various other tribal groups moved into the region. The Miamis moved in, taking control of what is western Ohio today. The Wyandot Hurons began moving in from above Lake Erie, taking control over the central region of Ohio. Along with them came the Ottawas, Chippewas and Potawatomis who moved further south. Along the Scioto River came the Shawnee from the southeast. They exerted the strongest influence with their fierce warrior culture, allowed them to obtain the most influence of all the coalescing groups of Native Americans. The Delaware, a group of Native Americans that had lived along the eastern coast, were being forced westward from their homeland. They too came to Ohio looking for refuge, and they settled round central Ohio, as did a small group of Mingos. So this was the state of affairs when the early frontiersmen came down the Ohio. They saw the remains of the mighty Mound Builder settlements. They encountered numerous Native American groups that always seemed to be in motion from one place to another, and there was no organized authority in the land. No one to rally the people to fend off an invader. Had the Iroquois been able to stay, to exert their influence and unite the Native Americans as one force in Ohio, then things may have turned out dramatically different. Ohio's historic Native Americans following is a rough estimate of the Native American nations inhabiting Ohio at one time or another since first noted by European explorers or settlers. Some were large and consisted of multiple villages found throughout the territory, while others consisted of a single small village. Adding to the confusion is the fact that these tribes often migrated either seasonally or periodically as needs or demands rose. It should be noted that the tribal names are a mix of French and English terms based either on descriptions of physical appearances, common traits, or an attempt to phonetically spell their name through European ears. It was not uncommon for many tribal groups to have various names. First there was the name they called themselves. Then there was a name their allies called them, and then the name their enemies used. Tribal names were then translated by traders into their own language, which was further translated either phonetically or by what the word meant. This leads to a variety of names. There has been some effort to standardize these historical names, but because American settlers coming to Ohio often use Native American names for their geographic area, those names have become the norm. The following are the major Native Americans that inhabited the Ohio country from 1650 to 1800s. Over this time period, there was also increasing influence by the French, English, and finally the Americans. One thing in common with all of these Native American groups was that they knew this land was valuable real estate. Bloody conflicts, battles, and wars would be fought to control this real estate. The fact that all of these nations were divided made them weaker as a force and as a political entity. There were a few great leaders that tried to unite all of the nations, but they lacked a common vision to unite around. They instead chose to ally themselves with the enemy of their enemy, and more often than not were on the losing side.
Thank you for watching Our Wild Ohio. It's support from viewers like you who make it all possible. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. Join our family and become a member of Our Wild Ohio by visiting the link in the description below. And until we meet again, stay wild, my friends.